All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Mormonism Live. It is January 1st, 2025. Folks, tonight we are going to take a look at the year in review of 2024. Since we're in the first day, we're going to look back and see what kind of crazy stories, cool things, entertaining stories, stuff that maybe you've forgotten about that happened in 2024. So we'll be right back after the intro, and we'll take a look at last year.
Mr. Reel and everybody else. Good evening. Welcome to the first Mormonism Live of 2025.
Look at that. Celebrate, celebrate. Hey, that's a really cool cup you have. You've mentioned it before.
I have. I got this from you. It was for Christmas. It says, to quote Hamlet, Act 3, Scene 3, line 92, no. By the way, I did look that up because it's a very important no. This is where Hamlet is going to kill his uncle in revenge for his dad, which would end the play prematurely since it goes on through Act 5, Scene 2, right? But he's going to kill him except for the fact that the guy is praying. He's feeling bad about what he did. He's praying for forgiveness. Hamlet says, so if I kill you, how is this revenge? If I kill you and you're in the act of praying, you got no sins upon you, and you go to heaven, you kill my dad, and for that, I send you to heaven. Is this revenge? And then he goes, no, I have a better idea.
And you got me a Cleveland Browns hoodie, which is really nice. I'm not going to wear it.
I'm kind of surprised you're not wearing that. I mean, I'm drinking out of the mug you got me.
I know. I will wear it on game days for the Cleveland Browns game. And I'm excited. Thank you very much. I'm a big fan of the Cleveland Browns. They're having another bad season. In fact, they are in contention for the #1 draft pick, which tells you how bad they're doing this year after making the playoffs last year. So there's that. Anything on your mind before we get started into the show?
Not really, except I'm really, really excited about the show, mainly because you took the first half of the year. I took the second half of the year, that being 2024. And, even though I was the most recent half, I was still surprised by how much stuff happened.
There was a lot of stuff that happened. And I'll just say, too, as a thank you, I did send out some thank you emails the last couple of days. It always happens at the end of at the end of a year. We get to December, it's the last few days. There are people who are looking to get some donations out so that they can capitalize on the tax break that you get with those and to be able to give a little bit back to communities. And so there were some donations that came in at the end of the year. One of them, by the way, was an $8,000 donation. And I'm not going to say the person's name. There were a couple of $500. There was $1,000 something, $1,300 and something. I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. It means a lot to RFM and myself. This is how we do what we do, and this is how we have been for years, bringing you insightful commentary on Mormonism and how we're able to do so going forward. So thank you so much to everybody who supports the program, and thank you to those who at the end of the year made a special donation to Mormon Discussion Incorporated and to Radio Free Mormon and to the various shows that we do, such as Mormonism Live. All right, so let's jump into it.
Can I just make an announcement? Because I almost sense that there is a person who's missing here. Because even though this is Mormonism Live, because it's a Wednesday, right? And it's January 1st, 2025, so we're doing a retrospective on Mormon news stories, then it's kind of like a newscast kind of thing. In fact, I went back through the newscasts to look at what the stories were in order to select things for tonight. And Rebecca, we reached out to her to see if she wanted to join in, but she has prior engagements. I just wanted to get that out of the way and let you know that we thought of her, and Rebecca, to let you know that we thought of you too. We miss you, and we wish you well, and look forward to you coming back real soon.
Yeah, and we'll see you hopefully on the newscast this coming Monday night, 6 p.m. Mountain Time for those who enjoy the Mormon newscast. All right, so let's take a look at the top Mormon stories of 2024. And I almost called it Latter-day Saint stories the only reason I said Mormon stories because there's at least one story here towards the beginning that is outside of the LDS church, but within Mormonism. And so with that, let's start with January. Some months didn't have much going on, at least nothing that we thought should make sort of a final like top 20 list or so. But January 2024, and this was the one story that seems very obvious, comes from outside of the LDS church. It is Stacy Cram, who was announced to be the next president of the reorganized, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, now known as the Community of Christ, has been known as that for decades, but some people still refer to it as the RLDS Church. But it's the Community of Christ, and it's the first female leader. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this would be the first female head of any denomination within Mormonism and its breakoffs.
As far as I know,
yeah,
certainly the two major ones.
Yeah. And so congrats to Stacy Cram. That is really kind of a cool thing.
I had an 8th grade English teacher whose name was Cram, Mrs. Cram.
Yeah.
Back in Kent Junior High.
Yeah. It is pretty forward thinking for a Mormon denomination to do this. And the Community of Christ, of course, is always sort of ahead of the curve on these kinds of things. So there's that. We noted very early in January that the Mormon Church had hired Aaron Sherinian, and we had talked about this on the newscast, but this was a major story, and it caused a lot of backlash because the guy is certainly qualified. When he was hired, though, there were people who immediately had their attention drawn to his social media content. And what became crystal clear is that Aaron was a very public ally of the LGBTQ community. And the LDS church, for whatever reason, either didn't know about that or wasn't really ready for it to be front and center in the public arena. And immediately Aaron sort of disappeared. And again, a whole year has gone by. You mentioned this before the show started. A whole year has gone by. And Aaron, there is nothing we can clearly point to that has his fingerprint on it.
That's true. And you know, the LDS Church is probably the least likely organization in the world to not know what's on its members' social media. They have an entire committee devoted to it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later too. The social media listening team, which used to be, at least in some way, referred to as the Strengthening Church Members Committee.
It sounds even worse now, but we'll get to it. I mean, it sounds even more like they're spying, they're listening.
Yeah, and they're pretty forward about it now. We'll get to that when we talk about that article. But Aaron Sherinian makes news sort of along the way because at the newscast, the two of us and Rebecca are constantly reminding the audience that Aaron Sherinian is still nowhere to be found. And it makes one wonder. I speculated with you before the show started that, you know, what Ben Spackman is talking about is some advanced change in how we approach LGBT members. And if the church sort of has that on the horizon, this would have been the perfect guy to hire to have sort of situate you in articulating that appropriately as you make those changes, as you make those adaptations. But again, he's nowhere to be found, and we have no idea what his job is or what things he's had an impact on.
That's true. And Rebecca did get a photograph that included him in it. It was in the last half of last year, 2024. Was it Zelensky? Was it church leadership meeting with Zelensky, I think?
It was. He was at the table meeting with President Zelensky of Ukraine. Yes.
Yeah, one of the many people there.
Yeah.
But there he is. It's like a cameo.
So there's that. And this sort of caused an uproar in other places too. Aaron Sherinian, some of this comes from newscast episodes where we covered some of this news, but Jacob Hansen and Zwick Media, I think, is the other entity.
Greg Matson?
Yeah, yep. And I think it's Zwick Media is the name of the YouTube channel. And they had pinpointed that all of this positive coverage of gay and lesbian, transgender individuals, for instance, Richard Ostler there, pictured on the right, there was lots of conversation about how they were confused by how the church seems to be shifting and welcoming in LGBT folks, we had that one story that Jacob used, which was a transgender woman who joined the church with less hoops to jump through
Right.
than is the normal standard. And it seemed like the church was changing. And then this all happened with Jacob and Zwick Media making a big deal out of it. And the church seemed to take a step back at that moment, sort of sensing that maybe it was going to tick off its conservative segment of its crowd. So we'll be interested to see sort of what happens. Elder Kieran there pictured was called as an apostle to cover that later in the year as well. Then there was this big story. There was Jody Hildebrandt in Ruby Franke, and it was serious child abuse taking place under the guise of therapy. And you have this LDS therapist in this situation where, you know, they take these kids sort of into their care, and their approach is to be deeply disciplinarian and really abusive. And the two of these women got caught perpetuating this abuse with diaries and journal entries. They were keeping a pretty good record of some of the things that they were doing. And
Well, one of the kids who escaped, as you'll recall.
Yep.
And I was this Ruby's boy, like 10 years old, 12 years old, whatever it was. He was the hero in the story, and he had managed to get out of with duct tape.
Yeah.
And escape. And it was the middle of the summer, and it was down there in St. George, and he didn't even have shoes on.
Mm-mm.
And the nearest house is, I don't know, miles is probably too much, but these are nice houses on probably 5 acres at least each. And he's got to make his way to the nearest one and try and, well, anyway, it's all coming back to me. And it was just horrific.
Yeah. And then it came out in March of 2024 that they had some interactions with Brad Wilcox, if you remember. So he seems to find himself, again, he wrote some great books on grace, and he became sort of a fan favorite of the younger generation in the church. But in the last few years, having been called in the young men's presidency, every time he seems to make the news, it's because he's putting his foot in his mouth, or he's stepping into situations that he probably wishes he hadn't.
Yeah, I think grace is a non-starter in Mormonism to begin with. You have to very much redefine the word the way it's understood by Protestant Christians in order to even give it a place at the table in Mormonism. Because if you're going to say grace, you're saved by grace, regardless of what you do, right? Because you've made this acceptance of Jesus Christ, and he saves you by his grace. That's the Protestant understanding. All right. His grace is sufficient. But you can't have that living in the same house and under the same roof with. We have prophets of God on the earth today who speak to God, and we have to do what they tell us to do. That's like oil and water. They don't go together. And so that's why I think it's kind of a lost cause. And I've been watching it. I've written about it all along the way, at least since the early 80s. This grace theme that a number of church people and professors like Robert Millett and et cetera have promoted. But at the end of the day, it always ends up being whatever grace is being promoted always has to be put under the foot of the prophet.
Yeah, and I'll just say somebody made the comment, and I put it up on the screen, but I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that both of these women made some sort of plea agreement and got a certain amount of time in prison, if I'm not mistaken, a certain amount of years. And somebody said 20. I'm not sure what the number is, but they've got to make some reconciliation with society. So they're on their way to doing that. So there's that. Let me grab that comment off, and then we'll go to the next one. And folks, we have a lot of them to go through tonight. We'll stop and we'll chat about some of these, make comments maybe briefly on each, but maybe go in length into a few of them. Tim Ballard was a major news story, at least through the first 7 or so months of the year. Tim, who ran a nonprofit that was alleged to be rescuing children who had been essentially kidnapped, sold into like the sex trade business and that kind of stuff. And he was trying to bail kids out of that. And what came out this year was lots of accusations that Tim wasn't really doing that kind of work. What Tim was actually doing was pretending to rescue kids. And in the midst of pretending to rescue kids. He was grooming and getting a little too close to various women who he had told them that their job was to pretend to be Mrs. Ballard, essentially, whoever his character was as he went into other countries to pretend to be his wife. And that the situations he would train them to be physically intimate with him under the guise of the couple's ruse, is what it was called.
It's got to
And
be believable because
yeah,
obviously they're going to have cameras in our private quarters
yeah.
and showers.
And it wasn't just one woman. And then he also ran into some hiccups with a woman that he employed under a more administrative role as well. And then there was Sean Reyes, who was the Utah Attorney General, who seemed to, again, on some sort or another, be, I'm going to say allegedly, in close association with Tim Ballard and sort of helping his movement to happen. So any thoughts from you? Because I know you covered this story several times on the Mormon Newscast. Anything you want to say about Tim Ballard or Sean Reyes?
Well, we're waiting to see how these things play out in court, which is what I'm interested in mainly. And that's because there's been a history of so many allegations being made in this case. And I've gone over them. They haven't changed too much. But anybody who is in any way associated with this fellow, Tim Ballard, ends up getting dirty from the contact. But, just because you're involved in it with him, if you go on his trip, okay, where he's pretending to the donors up in the United States and wherever that he's a super child rescuer. But when he's on his missions, he's pretending that he's a child molester. Remember? And that he wants to find children for this big party that all of these people are having on an island or wherever it is. And this is how he gets at the people to provide the children and then arrest them for it. That's the main thing that he does. I guess when he's not using a psychic in order to find these children, which apparently from reports never worked in spite of the money they paid her in order to find this kid. Gardy Marty.
And the other thing that adds to this was there were at least two individuals who were working or serving with Tim Ballard in an effort to also help rescue children. And they went on missions. And I think you spoke to one or maybe both of them, but at least one of them for sure in an interview conversation. And both of them shared, like, we just never saw a kid rescued. This didn't have the feel of some real program to rescue kids, that it seemed like it was sort of hokey, and we often ended up at strip clubs, and
yes,
Tim would drink quite a bit, and they would.
This is where you're going to find the people who know where the kids are to bring to the party, right? That's the whole MO.
Yeah, such a strange thing. Tim Ballard and Sean Reyes. I wouldn't trust these two for nothing. Their reputations, as far as the things coming out, seem to indicate that they have a hard time figuring out healthy ways to do things. So,
and the argument being, and I think there's some weight to it, is that when you go into a country that has a great deal of poverty, which pretty much most of us here in America, United States, could never dream of, right? Just abject poverty. And you go and you start saying, we will give American dollars to you in large amounts, in amounts that you've never seen, in amounts that you wouldn't make in a year, for providing kids. And then the argument becomes, okay, so are you solving a problem or are you creating a problem?
Yeah, I was going to just note what you just said. If you go into another country trying to spend a lot of money to procure a kid who's in the sex trade business, you run the risk of people kidnapping a kid into the sex trade business just to get your money.
Right.
So many things here to sort of wrestle with, but Tim Ballard was a constant presence in 2024, along with his good friend, Sean Reyes. And we shouldn't forget the apostle who was really close to the situation, Elder Ballard, who seemed
never hidden anything from anyone,
other than maybe investing in Tim's MLM or of one sort or another. So,
oh my gosh, and that crazy psychic, totally crazy psychic, still a member. Trevor Larson says she was talking to Nephi. She was talking to the Lord commanded Nephi to go and get, she had Nephi. And then the response was, hey, this isn't crazy at all. It wasn't that Nephi. It was my great grandfather whose name happened also to be Nephi.
And the
Not
only
crazy.
the only apostle I think that died in 2024 was Ballard, and he died at exactly the right moment to keep this story from getting worse.
I think that's true. Sean Reyes should have been so lucky.
All right, so February. That was just January, by the way, guys. That was
we're gonna have to. Oh my gosh, we're gonna have to skip a couple months in the middle of the year.
We will. We'll do that. So February 2024, there was a report that came out that cell phone data was being collected and studied on various religious denominations across the country. There was a report somewhere that Mormons claim that 76% of Latter-day Saints were attending church. And what this research found was something far different. It said, so they gave a lot of leeway. They said you only had to attend church 36 weeks of the year, and then you were considered a weekly attender. Even with the extra leeway, there were only about a third as many LDS weekly attenders as the number who claimed to be LDS weekly attenders. So only 29% of the US population that is LDS were weekly attenders to church, and by weekly attender meaning 36 weeks a year. And that's sort of what we've always thought. As those of us on this post-Mormon, doubting Mormon sort of segment, this sort of space, as we discuss the activity rate of the church, since the church doesn't release it, we often arrive at somewhere between about 27 to 35%. And this study comes right into that. So 29%. And this data should be much more trustable than the data that is self-reporting. Again, 3 times as many people are self-reporting that they're weekly attenders within the LDS church when that's not the case. So this was a cool little story. So there's that. And then we had this story that you covered as well in the Mormon Newscast. There was the stake president charged with failing to report child abuse. This was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Right.
And if I remember right, he ended up being, the charges were dropped, correct?
Yes.
And you kind of saw that coming. If I remember right, when we covered the story, you sort of saw this as this wasn't going to be a kind of moment where he was going to be held up as kind of a litmus test or sort of a under the microscope as a new way to sort of attack these things, but that these charges weren't really, this wasn't really the right case to see its way all the way through. And so charges were in fact dropped.
Well, if I recall correctly, and I did not go back and review the story because it was in your half of the year, man. But my recollection is that the facts were so bad. I mean, hyper technically, maybe you can squeak it into the statute, but this was a situation that had happened like 20 years before when the people were kids and now they're all adults. You know what I mean? And it comes to his attention, and then, it was just very, very bad facts for a charge to have been filed. And I thought it was a mistake to file it in the first place. I think it was rightfully dismissed.
And then after that, there was a fun story that was sort of created in the post-Mormon space. So Gerardo was from Mormon Stories, was looking to figure out, based on all of the stuff going on in the LGBT community with people being that Jacob Hansen and Zwick Media were confused by what seemed to be the church's shifting approach and with that segment of its membership and out in the world at large. And yet there were some Latter-day Saints who were able to, Charlie Bird being one of them, who were able to participate fully and even made comments, both private and public, that they were sort of allowed to have more privilege. And Gerardo decided to go to Charlie Bird's ward and to see for a fact if he was allowed to participate fully in the church. And it
Let me take the sacrament.
Took the sacrament, yep. Sat with his boyfriend, and seemed to be fully integrated into the ward by all indicators, by all visual indicators. He seemed to be fully integrated into the ward. And the question Gerardo raised, as a gay man himself, the question Gerardo raised was, why are some Mormons who are gay or lesbian or transgender heavily persecuted with direction coming from above the local level, and then some Mormons who seem to be a little more of a social influencer seem to get a break when others don't? And I think it's a fair question Gerardo raised, but then John Dehlin and Gerardo and Mormon Stories took a lot of flack for that. And there was quite a response that came with that as well. And anyway, it's just a story that happened last year that we sort of saw kind of rise up within our ranks in this sort of social content creation space of post-Mormonism. But I think it became sort of a big controversy and had quite a bit of buzz when it was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, this one was sort of I don't know how to take this one. Yeah, this was D. Michael Quinn. Of course, D. Michael Quinn had passed away in his home when they had gone through the things at his residence. They had found his memoirs, and the family, or I assume the family, decided to have those published. I don't remember or know offhand if he had indicated in his memoirs that he wanted those to be published. But they got published, and it's a chosen path, a memoir, D. Michael Quinn. And there was one story in particular, and I wanted to read this because having gone back and reviewed 2024, I still can't quite figure out what is going on here. It feels like it could be nothing, and it could be something.
It could just be what it looks like.
It could just be what it looks like. And that leaves me wondering one way or the other still. So he says, from my journal, then President Kimball began kissing me on the cheek as he talked, saying a few words and kissing me again and caressing my arm and shoulder. Quote, "I have a special love for you," President Kimball said in that deep, almost whisper voice. It's almost like a Boyd K. Packer kind of voice because he had his vocal cords had issues and he had to use the machine. For folks who are younger, you may not know this, but Spencer W. Kimball, I don't know if he had throat cancer or what, but he had
partial laryngectomy, I think is what he had.
And so he had a lot of trouble speaking for the rest of his life. And so that's what D. Michael Quinn is referring to. Said in that deep, almost whisper voice that is left of his partial, there you go, laryngectomy.
That's where I got it from.
There you go. And he continued and neck as I told him that I was thrilled to be in the presence of the prophet of the Lord. Quote, by now he was virtually bathing my cheek and neck in kisses. And I put my arm around his shoulder and kissed him on the cheek and told President Kimball that I loved him, after which he kissed me a couple of more times on the cheek. I felt no tears or any emotion, but joy and love that seemed so natural. And for the first time in my life, it seemed the most natural thing in the world to be kissed repeatedly by a man, to have him express his love for me, to tell him I loved him, and to kiss him. It didn't matter that the man was 50 years older than I. So there is that. And he goes, I lost all sense of time, but this must have gone on for several minutes. So there's that. Any thoughts on D. Michael Quinn? I do miss him. What an incredible historian.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This was just a very interesting reminiscence. And I'll tell you, obviously, the attention that's been drawn to this story wasn't because of the age difference.
No, and some other data point that people don't know is that prior to D. Michael Quinn's excommunication as part of the September 6th, Spencer W. Kimball laid hands on D. Michael Quinn's head and prophesied that he would one day be called as an apostle of the Lord Jesus Christ. Of course, that never happened. So there is that. But D. Michael Quinn and Spencer Kimball had an affinity for each other beyond just this one moment. And again, I don't know what to make of it. I'll just let it sit as it is, but it is an interesting interaction.
And there was a brief period of time that D. Michael Quinn worked for Spencer Kimball as his pool boy.
No, that's not true.
What? Isn't that true? I thought that was in there.
I don't know that. I don't think that is that true?
No, that's not true.
Okay, I didn't think so.
I made that up.
All right. So then I think we're still in February. This is the hiring we were talking about by the Strengthening Church Members Committee. This is the senior social listening analyst that the church is attempting to hire. So we all know that there is a Strengthening Church Members Committee. They're essentially the group that spies on everybody in the social media arena on what is being said, positive and negative, about the church by allegedly faithful active members who have doubts, ex-Mormons, and non-Mormon media coverage as well. And so they have this special group inside the church that is in charge of sort of spying on everything going on Facebook and private groups, to the point where some of these folks have even come forward and said years later, after leaving the church, that they worked for this inside group. They would create fake profiles, sometimes of a different gender. So it'd be a man creating a profile of a woman. They would infiltrate various.
That's got to be against some commandment.
They would infiltrate various Facebook groups, make claims that would lead others to think they belonged in the group, and then they would collect information. In fact, I remember the one weird name of one of them that did this. It was Pasco Wellington was the name of the person. And I know John DeLynn interviewed a gentleman who was one of those who claimed that he worked for them and created fake profiles, infiltrated groups. But here in February, we have the church trying to hire a senior social listening analyst. And here's what it says: to meet the needs of the church, we seek to build teams that represent the diverse perspectives, broad life experiences, and backgrounds of our global church membership. With that in mind, we encourage all qualified applicants to apply. Here's the job description. It is, I'm going to change that so that is off the screen. The social listening team is responsible for maintaining awareness of online content and conversations about the church, with emphasis on social media content. Social listening team members use the information to conduct analysis and prepare reports to assist church leaders and other organizational leaders in their responsibilities. Team members use subscription tools and other industry techniques to aggregate and analyze content. And then when you go down below.
Is that crazy? That's crazy. This is CIA.
Yeah.
This is spying.
Yes. And once you understand, if I just saw this, I might go, okay, no big deal.
By the way, I know it exists, and I know it exists, right? It's just that they're putting it right out there in the job description.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. If I just saw this, I might not know exactly what I'm doing. But once you understand what the SCMC does, you become crystal clear that this is some facet of that. This is allowing somebody to get hired to collect data on what's going on out in the internet and to then send reports up the chain. So yes, this is spying for the Lord right here. And they are hiring. So if anybody's interested, you can do that. So there's the SCMC. The social listening team collects the information and then passes it up.
So you see the social listening team as a committee beneath and part of the SCMC. Because
I know that the SCMC still exists, because of the threats that I had gotten and when we exposed that
crazy kid.
Yeah, the guy's son. Because I know the SCMC exists and because they're calling this the social media listening team, I have to believe there's sort of two separate entities, with one collecting the data and the other making decisions about what to do with it.
Okay.
So, and then again, Mormonism just never, we're only in March, folks. The statement heard around the world, Sister J. Annette Dennis, and I'd never heard of Sister Dennis before this, but she made the news several times in 2024, helping out with the Dog and Pony Show. There is no other religious organization in the world that I know of that has so broadly given power and authority to women. And then when I ask anybody to name it, Like, name the power and authority that women have. Don't tell me anything that's invisible that's not demonstrable. Name the power and authority that women have in the LDS church that you can demonstrate that no other religious organization in the world has.
They
Give
got
them.
priesthood power. They got the priesthood power. They've
Yeah.
all been given women the priesthood.
Yeah, this statement made no sense to me in light of all of the progressive and liberal religions out there that have fully included women in the ability to be pastors or ecclesiastical leaders.
Yeah.
Having women on the top leadership councils of that denomination. I'm not going to say she's lying because I think she thinks it's true, but this just doesn't hold up as any sort of actual truth.
I don't usually like the C word, right? The CU last Tuesday word, cult. But this is what a cult says. This is what a woman who's in leadership in a cult says. When we know exactly what the reality is of Mormonism and its relationship with authority and women, and they barely even meet. There's hardly any overlap in that Venn diagram, I'll tell you. But when a leader in the women's organization in the LDS church says there is no other religious organization in the world that I know of that has so broadly given power and authority to women, that is what somebody in a cult would say.
Yeah, 100%. Okay.
It is so divorced from reality.
Yeah. And then I'll mention it here in a minute, but she gets involved in the news and LDS circles again when General Conference rolls around. So anyway, that particular instance where she said that, it got over 8,000 comments. And if you remember right, those comments were removed. They disappeared. I'm going to go back here. They were removed. They disappeared. And the church claimed that it was a technological glitch. But then they were put back up, and it just and then every technology source within, I don't know if it was Instagram or Twitter or what it was. I think it was X, so Twitter, formerly known as Twitter. They said like that just wouldn't happen. Everybody claimed like that's just not how this kind of thing happens. This happens when somebody clicks the button and makes the comments all go away. So it's a strange moment, and it is a strange thing that we cover a religion that on multiple occasions, not just here, seems to be dishonest about what it's doing. I just never really get quite comfortable with religious dishonesty, even though it's happened pretty much day in and day out since I was 17 years old.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
From the very beginning. But I'll tell you, the thing that's interesting is that I think more than I have ever seen, to my recollection, the women in the church are catching on to this. And that's why these comments, which were largely unfavorable and questioning and pushing back on this statement, because they're not willing to allow themselves as a group to continue being told what it is that they're seeing when they know that what they're seeing is inequality.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, and then this came out. I'm gonna actually skip ahead on something else I've got here so I can see. So Kevin Hamilton does a regional conference of some sort, and he notifies the audience that the church is about to come out with a more hardline approach on wearing garments. And so we covered that, we talked about it. And then it happened when we got to General Conference. I don't know if it's on the next slide. Yeah, so there's the next slide. Sister Dennis again, and I believe Elder Oaks both made comments about how the garment is to be worn both day and night, every day, essentially. And that was the old rule. And then they had done away with that in the temple interview. And it seemed like they were giving people, specifically the young people of the church, more freedom to make their own decisions. But then the data must have come in that people weren't wearing their garments at all, and it was leading to some drop off in faithful adherence. And so then the church decided to just go 180 again and make wearing the garment every day, all day, night and day, a big deal again. And so when Hamilton said it, we all sort of anticipated that something else would happen. And then Oakes and Dennis, Sister Dennis and Elder Oakes in General Conference both reiterated that the rule had been redone, that the garment had to be worn both night and day, every day, all day long. Don't take it off unless you have to.
You know, it's just possible that an outsider could look at that and think that was a little bit culty too.
Yeah, any entity that controls your underwear. And this entity tells you that you have to wear a certain underwear in order to receive its saving ordinances. That's a little weird.
You're not getting into heaven without those temple garments. You need the nylon fabric, so if you're wide, you can slide through those pearly gates.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So there's that. And then there was another statement, I believe, from the church newsroom, which was also reiterating all of this. So it emphasizing covenants, first presidency, updates temple, recommend interview questions, share statement on the wearing of the temple garment. If you remember, I remember being a bishop, and we used to have to read a piece of paper to each member that told them that the garment is an outward expression of an inner commitment to follow the Lord Jesus Christ. And then we also had a temple question. Do you wear the garment both night and day as instructed by the Lord? You would ask that question to any endowed member renewing their temple recommend. And then that question was taken away, and the paper that you read was taken away. And now the question didn't go back, I don't believe, but a new statement is to be read to members going in for a temple recommend interview to encourage them to wear the garment night and day.
This has occurred to me before. I don't think I've remarked on it, but this expression, which is newly coined in the LDS church, an outer expression of an inward covenant. Didn't you read that there?
I just know that the original wording of the paper I read over and over and over and over again was that the wearing of the garment is an outward expression of an inner commitment to follow the Lord Jesus.
Right. Now, that was totally stolen by the Mormons. They didn't come up with that. I mean, and I have only heard that as recently as that statement. This is a statement that has a lot of roots to it, and I don't profess to know them all, but I do know that at least as of the 1980s, when I was talking religion with a Baptist friend of mine, right? And my question was, well, if you believe that works are not necessary, why do you think you still have to get baptized? Because that sounds an awful lot like a work, right? And the response is that baptism is not strictly necessary. It is the outer manifestation of an inward commitment to follow Jesus. So I believe it has, like I say, a much more extensive pedigree than that. But the church is once again borrowing language, I believe, from traditional Protestant Christianity that predates Mormonism and its use of it in order to couch its teachings about the temple, about garments, about things that might sound a little bit odd in Protestant language. So hopefully to make them seem more normal.
And then the weird thing that sort of came out from all of this, and it's there in that second paragraph, it's the garment of the holy priesthood is a sacred symbol of Jesus Christ. Now we recognize that it's a symbol of the covenants that we make in the temple that regard the gospel of Jesus Christ. But I never ever understood that the underwear with its Masonic symbols on it was symbolic of Jesus Christ himself. And I was going to ask you, do you remember ever being taught that prior to them saying that in this moment?
I am so sorry. I was over here in the live chat. And what was your question again? Was I ever taught what?
Were you ever taught prior to this moment in 2024 that the garment is a sacred symbol of Jesus Christ?
No, not at all.
Right.
That's crazy because you can say it on the one hand, but demonstrate it. I mean, what is it about this that makes it symbolic of Jesus Christ? It's much more symbolic of Jason's golden fleece than anything than Jesus Christ, for crying out loud. How did Jesus become underwear?
Yeah, and if the apologists want to differentiate the endowment from the presentation of the endowment came from God, but the presentation of the endowment is what was taken from Masonry, then the underwear having Masonic symbols on it seems to be the presentation of the endowment and not the endowment itself. It's such a strange thing to sort of take this Masonic thing that's been blended with Mormonism and then suddenly in 2024 claim that it is a symbol of Jesus Christ himself.
Bill, there is no difference between the endowment and the presentation of the endowment. Okay, that never existed. The only reason it came into existence was because the apologists for the church were forced to create a distinction when it became inarguable that the endowment is based largely on the Masonic ritual, okay? The Masonic temple ritual. So once you get to that point, you can't deny it anymore. Now we've got to make a distinction. And the important thing, right? The important part of the temple endowment is the part that doesn't have to do really with the Masonry. That's the non-important part. That's the presentation part. But the presentation part not as important as the actual ordinances of the temple. But you don't want to press that too far, because when you find out about the ordinances themselves, the actual ordinances are accompanied by the names, the signs, and the tokens that were taken from Masonry. So in other words, Masonry is actually put in the most sacred parts of the temple endowment, which are the ordinances themselves and the covenants you take. All of those are imbued with Masonic rituals.
Yeah. So anyway, strange moment, 2024. And then, of course, knowing now that later on in the year, there's adjustments made in the garment styles so that more revealing clothes can be worn. It makes, by the way, I don't imagine that they made that change on a whim. It feels like all of these things have to be talked about and thought out and planned. What I mean by that is the emphasis to wear the garment night and day that they had gotten away from, but then put their foot down and re-emphasized, seems to have happened knowing that just a few months later, the garment adjustments would be made in the clothing style.
Of course they knew. Of course they knew. And it's crazy because when you actually try and put these different generations together, generations of garment teaching and belief and design, what you end up with is, I guess the leaders of the church really don't care about their members very much, because they're increasing the amount of their body that can be exposed to harm by decreasing the amount of their body that the garment covers. But they've abandoned that. No longer does the garment have any kind of protective power.
Right. Right. At one time, it was believed to have magical protective power. Hence, the more of your vital organs it covered, the better off you were, the more protected you were. But now, in an age where we no longer believe the garments have protective power, it doesn't really matter how much of your body they cover. Yeah, sort of crazy. Okay, so
Yes.
there's that. And then this was a change. President Camille Johnson, head of the church's nearly 8 million strong global women's organization. It's only really church articles that say that kind of thing, or the Salt Lake Tribune, announced that women as young as 18 could receive their temple endowment without waiting for pending marriage or mission, as has been the common practice. So so starting in that moment, in March, women 18 years old must be worthy of a temple recommend, have completed or are no longer attending high school or secondary school, have been a member of the church for at least a year, and feel a desire to receive and honor temple covenants. They no longer had to be married. They no longer had to wait till they were older. They could immediately go through the temple and get the endowment. Again, this is also something that I think would be very much part of the conversation as the church planned out what it was doing with the garment and re-emphasizing it and changing the clothing standard. So this would have been something that would have been on their mind as well. Okay, then we get into all of this stuff going on with the temples in various locations. This I thought was just a huge moment that did not get enough coverage that it deserved. The Lone Mountain Temple in Northwest Las Vegas, you covered this on the newscast. The Lone Mountain City Council members in the council members of each district had a donation come into them of $10,000 a few months prior, and this was paid to them by a legal group that was connected directly to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In other words, the LDS Church, through a subsidiary legal group, paid the council members of the Lone Mountain Temple $10,000 each. So then a few months later, there would be a vote taken on whether to allow the temple to break building codes, zoning regulations, and build the temple where they wanted to. And those council members unanimously voted in favor. Each one of them that received $10,000 voted in favor of allowing that without any pushback at all, to the point where the citizens of Las Vegas have been trying to unravel that and don't seem to be able to have enough legal impetus on their side to be able to do so. But the citizens of the Lone Mountain, Nevada area there in the outskirts of Las Vegas have been trying to battle this and sort of make amends with it, but so far have been unable to make any leeway.
Yeah, every single one of those council people who got a donation from the law firm that was representing the church in that action should have recused themselves from that decision at that hearing.
Yeah. And but this was the beginning of a moment where various cities and towns began to have a little bit more prep information going into these conversations in city councils and government meetings as the church continued to try to build temples across the country and across the world, for that matter. But really, with an emphasis here in the United States, is where this pushback has been happening. So there's that story, and we show there the details of that. These donations. So you accepted. This is the Preserve Rural Vegas. This is the citizens forming an action committee trying to get something done. This was their letter. They said, also have noticed the fact that you have accepted $10,000 in contributions from the law firm Camphor Crowell that is representing the developer, which is the church. These donations occurred the same year the property was acquired by the developer, $2,500 on 6/14/2022, $3,000 on 9/9/22, $4,500 on 12/2/22. Along those same lines, it appears Councilman. And by the way, doesn't that look odd? Like you're going to get a small payoff in the beginning, and the more cooperation we see, as long as we see you continue to do what we need you to do, the big payoff comes at the end.
I will tell you that all three of those being made in 2022, they add up to $10,000, which is the maximum annual donation under the law there that a person can make to a political campaign.
Yep, of course. Along those same lines, it appears Councilman Knudsen, Councilwoman Seaman, Councilwoman Diaz, Councilman Creer have all accepted contributions totaling $60,000 from the previously mentioned law firm. In total, the council has received $70,000 from this single law firm, $40,000 of that occurring either right before the land purchase or right after. Lastly, we respectfully request that you please investigate any potential conflicts of interest that could occur if any person working on the previously mentioned bill or any other matter regarding the previously mentioned development is affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Thank you for your time and attention in this manner. Again, Preserve Rural Vegas. All right. And then we get David Archuleta officially leaving the church, and it had been a slow burn. He had little by little stepped into his authentic self, and it seemed like he was on a trajectory to end up outside the church, and that's exactly what happened. Not to say he's following in the footsteps of, but there are folks before him, Tyler Glenn of Neon Trees. Oh my goodness, my mind just went blank, but Dan from Imagine Dragons.
Reynolds?
Dan Reynolds from Imagine Dragons. Folks who sort of in the music industry wake up to their not fitting into Mormonism, seeing the unhealthiness of it, and stepping away for their own health and well-being. So David Archuleta and all the folks who seemed to be cheering him on when he was on the inside of the church turned their back on him pretty quick. There were lots of hateful comments at the time against David. And then we get this, another, just, I think, one of the biggest moments of the year. You asked me before the show started what I thought was the biggest story in the first 6 months that I was going to cover tonight. And I said, David Archuleta is likely the most viral moment. It's the thing that everyone in the world sort of would have had the best chance to know and be aware of that was happening inside Mormonism. But I think this to me is the biggest thing for the insiders of Mormonism is that the LDS Church bought the Kirtland Temple. And I thought this was just a huge moment. The Community of Christ sold the Kirtland Temple along with other pieces of property, some of them also historical sites. It also sold the LDS Church lots of historical documents and historical artifacts. And I think it's just one of these cool moments where we'd always been hearing these rumors that the LDS Church was going to buy the Kirtland Temple. As a believing Mormon, you really wanted to hear that. Well, it finally came to be in 2024. Anything you want to say about Archuleta or the Kirtland Temple purchase?
I think you've covered it. Those are both huge stories in 2024, and they happened at a similar point of time.
Yeah. Okay. And then April, just another sort of step along the way where
that was when we learned it. That was when we finally learned that the height of the temple steeple was important.
This is the first time in LDS history, and the contrary had been taught multiple times, that the height of the temple didn't matter, the size of the temple didn't matter. It was the ordinances that took place inside that counted. And suddenly in April 2024, the height of the steeple of the temple is one of the important beliefs of the LDS Church. It points us to heaven.
That is so cynical. That is so cynical of the LDS Church. It's really just striking me now how cynical that is to try and say, in order to get our way, we will create a doctrine out of whole cloth. And when you got a church, a religion that says, hey, we are willing to create doctrines out of whole cloth in order to get our way, then I think you've learned something important about them.
Yeah, it sure makes you wonder what other doctrines or abolishment of doctrines has happened in order to perpetuate what the church considers its need to do something in the here and now.
Yeah. Polygamy's on, polygamy's off. I think they both qualify.
Yeah. So there's that. So the McKinney, Fairview, Texas LDS Temple, and we all know what happened there. Again, they made steeple height a big deal. They wanted something quite big. This town, unlike the previous 3 or 4 that we had been talking about last year, this town decided to fight back, and it had enough information on the front end to be able to do so. And so they got together, banded together, and what ended up happening is that the LDS Church, led by a prophet, seer, and revelator with priesthood power, had to negotiate with a mediator in this small town and had to meet in the middle with these folks who, as you pointed out, it may seem unto some like a loss, but it was a victory for this small town going up against a $265 billion holding entity.
Yes, they brought them to the table.
Yep. Yeah. No Old Testament church would do that. That's for sure. You'd strike down fire, turn people to salt, burn them at the stake if you have to. But today's world, this is what priesthood gets you. It gets you a mediocre who plays it right down the middle, a mediator who plays it right down the middle. Okay. All right. So McKinney, Texas.
Thank you, Debbie Donovan. She says,
yeah.
Okay, support this because I will go broke for truth.
Yeah. Thank you, Debbie. Tithing lawsuits from 4 states against the LDS Church get transferred. Guess where? They were from various states. They get transferred to Utah.
Hey, that's one of my stories. Hang on. Because a lot of these stories continue to play throughout the year. But yeah, to Salt Lake City, and that's the Orrin Hatch building, right?
Yeah, you cover a different facet of this, but the lawsuits get moved to Utah, which is a little bit of a weak move for those who filed the lawsuits, because the LDS Church has a much higher chance of getting folks within the legal system, judges and whatnot, to side with it beyond what is reasonable in a state where 90% of politicians are Mormon, where lots of the judges are faithful, active Latter-day Saints. And again, a cult has an easier time getting its loyal members to do things for it than what would be found outside of that sort of influence. So, oh,
Absolutely. And my initial impression, my initial reaction to statements like that is always to go, oh, come on, these are professionals. But then I have to remember all the professionals who've done exactly that and compromised their integrity in order to do what the hell the church tells them to do.
yeah, there's some of them have even stated on camera that they are church bro. So,
And of course, it's not fair to say that just because that's happened with other officials, that means that Judge Shelby would be similar, but it doesn't mean he won't be.
at least Judge Faust wasn't.
No, Judge Faust.
All
He's
right.
my kind of judge.
Yeah. All right, then July, and I'll turn this over to you. So we are now in July of 2024. Take us through the second half of last year, RFM.
Oh, this is me now. Yeah. Okay. So we're at an hour. We'll be done in an hour's time, before an hour's up. Okay. I'm just going to hit over the tops of these things and we'll see how fast I can go. LDS Church sponsored a Tim Ballard fundraiser. Do you remember this one? We even had the details on this one, the receipts and the all events promo that went out that showed that Tim Ballard would be speaking at a location on June 29th, and that it was hosted by the Eagle Mountain Cedar Pass Steak. Oops. That was a fundraiser that was ended up being supported by the church. I don't know if there were repercussions to the stake president who was involved in that, but that there was that. What do you have to say about that, Bill?
The only thing I want to say here is once he sort of burns himself out in the Mormon arena, do you remember he goes over to the Catholic arena and starts teasing that he might join the Catholic Church and starts doing fundraisers left and right within Catholic circles in order to keep the ruse going?
It's incredible because you would think any church would look at this guy coming and say, that's a threat if you're saying you might join our church because we don't want you in our church, Mr.
Right.
Ballard. But yeah, I saw him cozying up to the Catholics. I think there are things in life more important to him than religion. Let's just put it that way.
It's not children.
No. Okay, next. What happened at the Stadium of Fire? Remember July 4th? 4th of July in heaven with all the fingertips going home? And here was, oh, can you play this? Are you able to do that, Bill?
Yeah, I can. It'll just take
I got
me a
two little
second.
videos here where we get to relive the excitement in the Stadium of Fire when the some of the fireworks went off course. You remember that? Here it comes. Right over this person's head, right into the crowd. And here's another play of it. Holy crap. That almost hit me. Hey, it hit that lady. She's over there. And here's another one. And we've got another one here on this next slide. This one you can see it striking down below on the field. Not the same one, but different fireworks. It was like Zeus had gotten angry.
The fireworks that malfunctioned inside the stadium were relatively small compared to the large pyrotechnics that are used during the show's finale. The festival said it had used Stellar Fireworks, the name of the company, for its shows and had been partnered for 40 years. It said that the fireworks were installed properly, inspected, and approved by authorities before the show started. A Stellar Fireworks spokesperson said that the firework that malfunctioned is called Whistle to Salute and had 45 shots in it. The spokesperson said that the firework blew itself apart in the middle of the firing, but why it happened is being investigated. New details about those malfunctioning fireworks that veered into the stands at a crowded Utah football stadium and struck members of the audience during a 4th of July celebration, sending up to 6 people to the hospital, according to authorities and the event organizer. The Stadium of Fire is an annual event organized by America's Freedom Festival. This year, the Jonas Brothers.
Yeah, those fireworks used to be called Whistle to Salute. They used to be called Whistle to Salute. They've been renamed Whistle to Kill. Yeah, these are the Whistle to Kill fireworks now. Yeah. And Imagine Dragons Dan Reynolds. Guess how I knew his last name, Bill?
Because it's on the screen.
Because, no, to help you out, because I just done this. Yeah, Dan Reynolds kind of formally, officially, publicly distanced himself from the Mormon Church, explained why he left Mormonism, more specifically, in some detail. And then we were still wondering, where in the world is Aaron Sherinian? You can see I've lifted some of these slides from Rebecca Biblioteca, most of them without attribution. And here we were wondering, where the heck is he? This is in the second half of the year, right? The Lone Mountain Temple tussle. This was the one, Lone Mountain, that Bill already talked about in Las Vegas, that they ended up doing what they were paid to do and voting for the church. Oh, there it was. Right. There's a little bit here. Can you play this? Just a little bit here, because I think this is part of the, is this part of the vote? Yeah, you can just hit watch on YouTube there. Oh, you know that.
A new LDS temple is coming to the community of Lone Mountain. This after the Las Vegas City Council unanimously approved the project Wednesday.
Yes. They made the right decision. And
that's a lot of money sitting up there in that city council.
For the opposition, they'll realize, hey, this was actually a good thing.
This is a good thing because it's a Mormon temple, and damn it, everybody's going to love it. It's like the Book of Mormon. Everybody, you just got to read it and you're going to love it. And if you're against a temple, all you got to do is have it in your community, blocking out the sun and the moon and the stars for, long enough until you start loving it too. So there's that. There was Meg, the consolidated class action suit. I think you mentioned that, Bill. The tithing lawsuit from the 4 states against the LDS Church gets transferred. Guess where? Hey, and now I see why. Because this is from April 18th, and what I had done was a retrospective of the entire lawsuit. So I went back and culled from those articles as well. Days of 47 parade. That's July 24th, isn't it, in Utah? Every year? And you remember who the Grand Master was? It was Elder David A. Bednar. And it doesn't make any difference if you're looking at him or if you're looking at his wife. The name's the same. Elder David A. Bednar on both sides of the truck. She doesn't even get mentioned as to her name. And I'm talking about his wife there. Sister Bednar. Hey, what's her first name again, Bill?
Susan.
Susan Bednar. Absolutely. I'll catch heck over not remembering that, I'm sure. I don't remember what David Bednar's first name is either. That's the Cardinellis excuse. Okay. And so also, this is a fun thing that there was this person who used to work for John DeLynn, and I'm having trouble remembering her name.
Jen Camp.
Jen Camp. That was it. Thank you. Jen Camp managed to bamboozle the idiot prosecutor down there in Utah to file criminal charges against John DeLynn for violating a no contact order that did not exist, which then got dismissed as soon as John DeLynn's lawyer said, hey, the order didn't exist. There's no crime here. So this is the order of dismissal. And that happened on July 29th, 2024. Oh, yeah. This was being Secret Lives of Mormon Wives was being promoted even back then. And the church was getting all upset about it. And ultimately, they will release a statement about it. So the Utah Supreme Court ruled that a civil case against a Utah Mormon OBGYN can move forward. It had been dismissed by the trial court. It went up to the Utah Supreme Court, which reinstated the case. So that lawsuit could go forward against the Provo OBGYN. And there's a number of the alleged victims. And this was where 94 Utah women who say the OBGYN they trusted to provide them with medical treatment and instead sexually assaulted them will be allowed to sue him. And the whole thing is that the trial court had said, hey, this isn't medical malpractice. And so we're going to throw it out. And then the Supreme Court says, yeah, it doesn't have to be. Anyway, it was a little bit more detailed than that. But this is just hitting the main points. There's the guy. There's the OBGYN right there. And this is a different story. This was a part on Latter Gay Stories where they posted something regarding the new church policy about trans people. So that happened this year as well. And there were a number of things there where, and we've talked about this a number of times since, transgender members can no longer participate in any overnight activities. I mean, it really sounds like, it just sounds like discrimination, doesn't it? It's just terrible. I would hate to feel so unwelcome in a church that claims to welcome me.
It is, there is a strange thing that, again, I don't know what the science and data says. If you can produce real, credible, peer-reviewed research that says transgender people or gay, because we used to make this argument in our society that, you know, gay men make up the highest number of child molesters. There's this idea that if a transgender person goes into a bathroom, they're much more likely to assault somebody than if someone of that gender born that way would assault somebody. And the thing is, until you come up with data that supports that the criminals really are the people you're preventing from being allowed to participate in certain ways, it really is a form of prejudice or bigotry or bias that is sort of hinged in our fears. It's hinged in our tribalism and how we make us's and them's in our world. And it often keeps us from actually protecting the vulnerable from the folks who really do. For instance, if I'm not mistaken, it's straight men who make up the largest portion of like child molesters. And percentage-wise, like out of every 100, whatever, straight men, out of every 100, whatever.
I'd say 100% of the people that I've represented who have been charged with such an offense would be that.
Yes. And so my point being is that when you get sidetracked by your bias, you often are missing the real opportunities that are out there to protect children the right way. So for instance, in Mormonism, it took Sam Young to tell the church that we need to have 2 adults in the room. And what happens? They excommunicate Sam Young, and then they create a new policy where someone can ask for a second adult, but it's not mandatory as Young was asking for. Meanwhile, we make these policies against transgender individuals that seem designed to protect our comfortability rather than actually protect vulnerable people from abuse and misconduct. It's a strange thing. Anyway.
Yes. And once again, the question then, they hire Aaron Sherinian to much fanfare at the beginning of the year. He goes into hiding, probably forced exile of some sort. And then in the middle of the year, they come out with this policy. And it's just like, it leads people to think, who the heck is in charge? It does not seem like there is one consistent thought process, policy-wise, going into what the church is doing. It seems to be all over the place and actually swinging back and forward erratically, even in the same year.
Yeah, correct.
All right. Oh, yeah, the youth festival. Remember, they got to go there and raise their hands and worship Jesus. And they worship Jesus. And that's important because I did a show about it, because Mormons don't worship Jesus, but now they're starting to. They're starting to get in the swing of things. They're starting to lighten up. September. Happy birthday, President Nelson. Who could forget that this was President Nelson's 100th birthday? On September 9th, 1924, the Statue of Liberty was declared a national monument, and President Russell M. Nelson was born. Now, I think that Rebecca put that one together. That could be a bit misleading because I believe that the Statue of Liberty was actually first dedicated in 1886, right? It just wasn't declared a national monument yet because it was a gift from those Frenchies. So it took us a while to get used to it, I think. But still, that's a freaking long time. 1924. And here's this guy. I don't know. It's like, I don't know, Frank Sinatra's grandkid who's there singing. I don't know what I think he's singing My Way in honor of President Nelson. And they've already released all of the balloons. And they're having a great time there. And then there was the breaking, or was there, of the Guinness Book World of Records in getting the largest number of signatures on President Nelson's greeting card, his birthday card, his 100th birthday card. And what a great way to celebrate how great a prophet he is than by breaking a Guinness World Record. The birthday became a state day. Now, I want you to remember, there is little to no overlap between the LDS Church and Utah politics. Okay, I want to make that clear at the outset before I start with this story. Because in honor of President Nelson, the Utah governor, Spencer Cox, declared September 9th of 2024 Russell M. Nelson Day. So any rumors that you hear about an influence going back and forth between the LDS Church and politics in Utah, they are completely made up.
Yeah.
Again, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, except here now it actually premiered, I think, in September. And it made a huge, huge stir. Though for the life of me, I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe it's because I don't watch it. And I don't watch reality TV. And I didn't watch this. And it just didn't interest me at all. And maybe it's causing a tsunami of devastation amongst the ranks of Mormonism. At least enough for the church to issue a formal statement against it. And you recall they did that, and they did it quite without quite mentioning its name. So it could be applicable to this as well as applicable to the movie coming out, and that came out in November, which was Heretic, and which we'll get to here in a second. Bill, say anything. Throw yourself in the way of me, any place to say something.
The only thing I want to say here about Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, and I watched most of it. I haven't finished it, but watched most of it. Most of the buzz in national media about it was sort of people watching, becoming aware of the male patriarchy, the sexism that goes on in Mormonism, the way these girls, their boyfriends and husbands treated them, talked to them, handled situations. That seemed to be the thing that stuck out for viewers, was patriarchy within Mormonism.
Interesting. And I can see why the church wouldn't want that. But then again, what do they want really? I think they just want General Conference played on all non-church media whenever they're going to address anything relating to Mormonism.
And tall steeples.
I'm telling you, back before I went on my mission, I think it was 60 Minutes did a piece on Mormonism or something like that. It may have been a different news organization, but I remember watching this and thinking, wow, this is very positive. This seems to be very positive about Mormonism. And I came to realize that within Mormonism, if there's a portrayal made on media about Mormonism and they get one thing wrong, the odds are people are going to say this is anti-Mormon material. If there's one thing they disagree with, then it's all anti-Mormonism.
Yeah.
There's quite a test of purity that goes on there. And even a person made a petition. I don't think this was the church, but this was a member of the church who went on change.org to create a petition to demand that Hulu cancel their series, The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives.
All 300.
And apparently at one point they had 325 people signed on to this thing.
Man, good job, folks. I don't think Hulu is paying attention to that data.
If you can't beat them, cancel them. And Amazing Grace is back, baby. Yep, Amazing Grace going to be back in the hymnal, and it was by the end of the year, I believe. We've got Amazing Grace back, and the only reason it's back is because it was actually there in the first hymnal, which itself was a list, I think, of songs. It had the lyrics of the songs that were compiled by Emma Smith, section 25, right, Bill? Got to be. Okay. But then it was deleted shortly thereafter, and now it's back. Peruvian temple employees were laid off, allegedly, for failing to pay tithing. Remember this story, Bill? Wasn't that crazy?
Yep, you got to pay a tithe, folks. You got to give your money. That is the number one priority in Mormonism, is that more money has to be coming in, exponentially more money than going out.
Yeah, I wish I could argue with you about that, because I'm still disappointed by that.
Yeah.
Guess what else happened? You remember this one, Mr. Reel? The excommunication of Nemo the Mormon?
Yeah, fellow content creator Nemo got axed by the church finally. Now I can only think of one person left who maybe there's room for that and they haven't been touched. It's like they've got special protection. It's almost like they wear the garment both night and day.
The cheese stands alone. Yes, here's what I'm wearing. I think it's what Middle Earth's annual. What was that? It was Mordor Run. because one does not simply walk? Yep, I have no explanation for it, and I don't know. We even had a member of my stake presidency on, remember, to ask the question, why hasn't RFM been excommunicated yet? And that was 3 years ago. Well, I don't know the answer to it. Going into October. Oh, yes, because I had done an episode early on about the miracle making of President Nelson, including, remember, the incident at Mozambique. And incredibly, President Nelson, he must have heard my most fervent prayers, or God did, and he revealed it to him so he could tell this story again in general conference and make it part of the record. Could you play this, please, while he gives us this thumbnail version of the incident at Mozambique when his life was divinely spared?
Later, I married my beloved wife, Wendy. She was a central part of my second example. When Wendy and I were on an assignment in a distant land, armed robbers put a gun to my head and pulled the trigger.
Even he doesn't believe it.
But the gun didn't fire. Throughout that experience, both of our lives were threatened. Yet Wendy and I felt an undeniable peace. It was the peace which passeth all understanding. Brothers and sisters, the Lord will comfort you too. He will strengthen you. He will bless you with peace.
I think that's it, Bill. Nothing makes me feel peaceful like a person putting a gun to my head and pulling the trigger. How about you, Bill?
I thought if I played it long enough, I might hear him say something that was true. So I was just waiting. Sorry.
All right. So that was a great moment. Also from conference, a new way to erase the past, temporary commandments. Elder Oaks introduced us to that. Do you remember this great line, Bill?
Temporary commandments, a phrase you can use when you no longer like what you used to like.
Yes. Now when we change, now when the church changes, which it's doing increasingly rapidly in recent years, now we have a new catchphrase. Oh, that must have been a temporary commandment, which actually is, it's an improvement on the prophet was speaking as a man.
Are you wanting to play this one?
Would you please?
Yeah.
The Lord's commandments are of two types: permanent, like the doctrine of Christ, and temporary. Temporary commandments are those necessary for the needs of the Lord's church or the faithful in temporary circumstances, but to be set aside when the need has passed.
When we get caught with our pants down.
Example of temporary commandments are the Lord's directions to the early leadership of the church to move the saints from New York to Ohio.
That's plenty. That's plenty. That's plenty.
Was the race ban a temporary commandment?
Obviously.
Yeah.
You see, these aren't policies anymore. What he's doing is introducing into the lexicon what he thinks is a superior apologetic, which is not that this was a policy, and not that he was speaking as a man, this prophet speaking as a man, because you'd only have to look like 1 or 2 steps ahead to see that's going to explode if you keep following that. Like, when do you know? How do you know when they're speaking as men? Well, when it blows up, right? So, but now he's trying to say, let's stop talking about that. Let's talk about temporary commandments and permanent commandments. And that way we lay everything that we've changed at the feet of God.
Like the November 2015 policy that only lasted 3.5 years, the way they framed that was as a temporary commandment. Both
yes,
the putting it in place and the removing it were both done by the love of God.
And you know, the wheels in this church run so slowly because of its huge size, I think, that this actually could be, even at this date, an apologetic for that incident.
Yeah.
He could be referring to it without referring to it, which is the way they always refer to things, by not referring to them, which generally makes it kind of confusing. Here's a permanent commandment along with the gospel of Christ. By the way, Elder Oaks, how do you know that the gospel of Christ is one of the permanent commandments? How do you know that's not a temporary commandment? Permanent one, obviously tithing. Tithing is going to be more permanent or just as permanent as Jesus, because even though President Joseph F. Smith said that the day would come when the church would have enough resources, we could get away with the obligation of tithing, the church has now said, forget about it. We can have more money than God, and you still got to pay your tithing. Because once you get caught up into this avarice, this cupidity, you can never have enough. And that's where the church is now.
If $265 billion isn't enough, how much would be enough?
That is a question that the miser can never ask him or herself, just the way a Mormon can never ask him or herself, what would happen if the church weren't true?
Yeah. What would that mean if the church wasn't true?
Yes, you can never allow for that possibility.
Yeah.
Because the answer is never enough. Once you get to wherever you thought would be enough, you need more. You have to have more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? And especially in a church that claims to be Jesus Christ, one and only. Oh, what was it mentioned? Polygamy. Is that a temporary commandment or a permanent commandment? And the answer is yes. Then there came all the language and oratory and predictions and warnings and almost threats about Jesus coming, which has really been going on, I think, since President Nelson became the president. Even before he became president, his wife was leaning into that. Wouldn't it be funny if we found out that that's where it's, coming from originally, is from Wendy. But wherever it's coming from, this is what's happening in the church today, is that when members are leaving and church leaders feel they are losing their grasp, the answer is to dial up the second coming is near rhetoric. And this has been the case since the early days of the church. Scaring people shirtless since 1830. And this was one of the slides that Rebecca had made with people talking about how they feel about all the second coming rhetoric. People saying, I am quite scared. Somebody else saying, has anyone seen a rainbow recently? And all this stuff. So apparently there's a deep-seated fear that's going on, a belief that the second coming is nigh because of statements made largely by President Nelson. And so much so that there's all these second coming Mormon podcast sites on YouTube that have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of listeners, to have people just replay a montage of President Nelson talking about the second coming. They're eating that stuff up out there. Also, the LDS Church faced 91 new child sex abuse lawsuits in California. And Rebecca had asked, could this be that rainy day we've been hearing so much about that they need all the money for? So that's another thing that's going on. And that hit the news in 2024. There was also the tank top garments, 194 years in the making. You touched on that as well. So not only did they talk in the first half of the year about how important it is to continue to wear your garments day and night. This isn't optional. You need to do this. Now they're following it up by changing the style of the garment. I think they're introducing this over in Africa. And we'll see how that goes, where the women have, well, tank top would be putting it too nicely. It's a very wide strap on the shoulder, but it doesn't have that shoulder cap. So this is what they're doing. November 2024, single men over 40 can serve missions. Hey, Bill, can you play the first 30 seconds of this? This is your story.
In a surprising move, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is now inviting single men, ages 40 and older, to serve as full-time missionaries. This change seems aimed at providing a volunteer workforce for clerical positions and to staff temples, family history centers, mission offices, etc. However, this unusual recruitment strategy that went into effect this past Friday, November 1st, raises a few critical questions. First, the pool of eligible men in this age bracket is likely to be severely limited.
I think we can take it
single
off
middle-aged
there,
men
Bill.
have.
Thank you. Thank you. I hate to cut into your story, but mainly just the top part, since we're just talking about these top parts of the stories and touching upon the heads of them, as the Book of Mormon would say. So let me see here. Oh, do you have something you want to say, Bill?
Just how many 40-year-olds are out there that can walk away from their job, have enough money to pay for their mission? Yeah, that was a strange one. I didn't see that coming. You could have asked me what things I would see the church changing to do, and that would not have been one of them.
No, but everything the church is doing over the last 10 years bespeaks a shrinking, active priesthood and non-priesthood. But priesthood is what the church cares about. Membership.
Yeah.
Getting rid of high priests. Now it's elders quorum. Now people over 40 years old can serve missions. What are you doing? What you're doing. Yeah, you're at the point in the war where you're arming your old men and your young boys and sending them out into battle. This is what I'm seeing here. It's not a good sign. Okay. Now, finally in theaters, Heretic, 95% certified fresh. And it did an incredible job. I thought this was a really, really interesting movie. We did the review. I did my review. And very, very well done. And bravo and kudos. And I think awards will be going to Hugh Grant for his job portraying Mr. Reed in this movie.
And just a note,
Yes.
currently on Rotten Tomatoes, it's got a 91%.
So it went down a bit.
Yeah, but I would have expected that. The moment this started getting some buzz, you just sort of expect some believers, some Mormons to go in and sort of make this less perceived as less valuable to a viewer than it was. And you see that happen to like Witness, the Dan Peterson film that got put together about the Book of Mormon witnesses. It had such a high rating
in August,
but it wasn't a good movie.
No.
And
the one before that, the original one, Witnesses.
Nobody went and saw it.
No.
And but you get a few Mormons to give it a review, make it have a good buzz, and it looks like it's a good movie, but it wasn't.
By all accounts, except for Daniel C. Peterson's, he seemed to like it.
Yeah, he loved it.
He was the producer, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Second Coming Frenzy, the New Elders Quorum and Relief Society lessons for 2025, which is now, start out with a bang. And they start talking about that second coming over and over. They're beating the second coming drum. 3 Davis County cities turned down homeless shelters, but someone needs to have one. Could you say a couple of words about this, Bill? I know this is in your state.
Yeah, so the state law says that when you have a certain population, you need to provide shelter, warming places for the homeless people when the temperature gets to be a certain temperature. And I think it's 15 degrees, I think is what it is, which is insane that at 20 degrees, it's not necessary. But at 15 degrees in the middle of winter, the state of Utah dictates that that certain population sizes have to provide a warming shelter for the homeless. And great, by the way, like people who are homeless often are homeless because of mental illness. Some are homeless because of situations that are completely out of their control. And we should be helping those who are less fortunate in our societies, those who have challenges. And so the state is doing the right thing. But what happens at the local level is that multiple counties that have the state dictate to do so, the local political scene, the folks there were turning down any suggested place. So you had the local government and its citizens throwing up their arms at any place that was suggested. Meanwhile, the state dictates that there needs to be one. And so I'm not sure how that all concluded, but they were in the midst of that last month when we covered it. I don't hear you, RFM.
I was saying thank you. I knew that you had extensive background knowledge on that because I think you reported on the original story.
Yep.
There was, of course, the elder Bednar coming down on all the students at a place where he was giving a devotional for sitting down before he sat down, or standing up before he stood up, or something that was, totally unnecessary and inappropriate in the presence of an apostle of Jesus Christ.
I just want to jump in for just a second. I do have the call number down there, 662-667-6667. I do have the call in studio open. Folks, what we were looking for is if there's some news story that you didn't see us cover tonight, we'd love to hear from you on any of the stories that we did share or on a story that somehow we missed. The one thing I know we did miss was Elder Ballard dying. I mentioned it, but we didn't have a slide for it. Elder Ballard dying and Elder Kieran being called in his place. But if there's anything else out there, folks, that caught your eye that we didn't go over tonight, please call the show. We'd love to take you into the call-in studio and have a conversation with you about what it was we missed. And also, if any of these stories stuck out to you and were interesting and you want to share a comment on them.
But we've got Elder Ballard telling everybody not to sit down before he sits down. So that kind of covers everything.
Yeah. Well, you say you meant Bednar. I said Ballard, but you said Bednar. You mean, right? Okay. I
meant to say Bednar. Did I say Ballard?
You did, but that's okay.
Yeah, Ballard's doing the long sit down.
He's sitting down so much he's laying down.
Yeah.
It's
the big sleep.
But okay. At least he's wearing the cool garb.
Jen, whoever this guy is, Jonah Barnes made news by stealing Radio Free Mormon's research and then using it to support the Book of Mormon. And they did an episode on that. Lavina Fielding Anderson, a year after she passes away, could not get reinstated into the church in her lifetime, even though she asked. She was turned down by the first presidency. This first presidency. She was turned down by President Nelson, as I recall. And then after she passes away, her son puts in a request that her work be done a year after she passes away, as is still required. And they do it without notifying him until after it's done. That was that story from November. Finally getting into December. The Mormon dentist murderer. This guy right here. The Mormon dentist who's alleged to have murdered his wife by giving her poison in protein shakes. This is a Mormon media moment. We've got Heretic, Mormon Wives, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, Real Housewives of Salt Lake City, sold on SLC, a new reality show. And coming up, I guess, this year now, since it's now 2025, American Primeval.
January
I'll be looking forward to that. Yes?
January 9th is when that's supposed to premiere on Netflix.
Cool. Okay. Oh, there's the new introduction to the Book of Mormon. Remember that? The one that simplified the language incredibly, cut it down by half, got rid of all the details. And then this happened, I think, in October and didn't get noticed until December. And as soon as it got noticed because LDS Living did a story about it that had everybody saying, what the heck's going on? And then the LDS Church took it out of the introduction and put in the old introduction again. Yeah, that was crazy. Absolutely crazy. And this is something. Is this mine? I don't recognize this.
I didn't put this in there.
Okay, this is getting creepy now. Nobody else has access to this, do they?
Oh,
Battle of City Church boils. Residents speak out against compromise on proposed temple. I think I must have put this in here. It's probably during one of my the spells I have where I can't remember what I do. Let me see here. Yeah. Actually, I think I meant to put in a different slide is the problem. But this slide has to do with Fairview, the Fairview Temple. And now it appears that the city and the church have reached an accommodation, which you mentioned. And now they had a meeting at which people could come and say what they thought about this accommodation, because it's not a done deal yet, except it really pretty much is. But now they're going to have to take it, send it to the council, the planning commission, vote on it, then send it back to the city council. They'll probably have another big meeting, which will be raucous and a lot of fun to watch. And ultimately, the city council is going to vote in favor of it. Okay, church news. More missionaries are serving, Mr. Reel. And you talked about this as well, but this is what the church is saying.
That's what
so
they
at the
say.
same time as the church is closing, shutting down, consolidating is the word they like to use, entire stakes in Utah, as the church is making it so men over 40 years old can serve missions, as the church is asking for senior couples to commit to not one mission, but 2 missions minimum, as they are drawing down on every resource they have to fill the needs they have. They're expecting us to believe that more missionaries are serving. What do you think about that, Mr. Reel?
I just know that the moment I asked people to pay attention to the number of missionaries, they suddenly started to go up. And even if they are up, which I to some degree believe, the Widow's Mite has done research into this and shows that this is just a blip since COVID. It's sort of a recovery moment from COVID. It's almost like you have two groups of missionaries out. You have the ones who didn't serve during COVID and the ones but who have gone out since. And then you have the ones who would have gone out now anyway. And so you have an overlapping group. Time will tell if we get it. And again, we have to trust that the church is telling us the truth about the number of missionaries. And normally you'd go, why would you doubt that? Well, as a former member of this church, I can list about 100 moments where this church has been dishonest. And so when it does say things, I don't trust what it says. I try to figure out what is provable, demonstrable. We will see. Time will tell if there is a real uptick or not. Even if they are being dishonest about it, other indicators will show otherwise eventually.
Very good. All right. And then there was what is it? The sex stories for tots that the church just put out about the plural marriage thing. And we just covered this like a week, 2 weeks ago. So everybody still remembers this. I still think this is going to continue to be a big story in early 2025. And I think it's going to pick up steam about these church stories made to be read to little children by grown-ups about Joseph Smith practicing plural marriage and how it was hard to do, but he did it anyway because God told him to do it. And when God tells you to do something, you do it, even if it's hard.
Yeah, if God tells you to do something out of the sexual norm, little children, you should trust your leaders and you should trust God. Do it.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. I almost feel like you're parroting me back to me. Exactly. This is what the lesson is, isn't it? The lesson is, listen, little girls, okay? Little girls especially, you need to listen to this. If any priesthood leader in your church tells you to do something sexual that you don't feel comfortable with, you do it anyway. This is why this is so wrong. This is why this is such a bad idea. This is why I can't understand why nobody at any point said, hey, maybe this isn't a good idea to include this for little kids. And I think that's going to be it. Oh, no, there's this sports story. And you love sports a lot more than I do. This is the 7 million NIL, name, image, likeness contract reportedly lured AJ Dibansa to make BYU commitment per NCAA Insider. So BYU now has a apparently very talented basketball player on the college team, which they have paid well for. But I'm guessing they wouldn't pay that much unless they thought they would get more in return.
They were able to outbid every other college for this kid. He was the nation's #1 high school recruit. And they were able to outbid it because BYU sees not only an advantage with the basketball program, but also the ability to capitalize on his name, image, and likeness for the beneficial public relations of the church.
Very good. And that's it. Those are the top Mormon stories of 2024. We're ready to go to phone calls.
We are. Let me take that off the screen. And we do have some calls. So let's see if this all works seamlessly. So Charles, are you there? Give me a second, Charles. If you're saying something, give me just a moment. I'm going to figure out if we can make this work. So
I hope this isn't the Charles that you dropped prematurely off the Christmas Eve show.
It might be, and hopefully I don't drop him this time. But give me a second, Charles. This happens once in a while. Disconnect. Let's try again. All right. Are you there, Charles? I'm going to do this one more time.
I hope it's not the same Charles.
Disconnect. Let's try this one. That's not it. Bluetooth. Sorry, folks. This happens from time to time, and I'm not really sure why. Charles, are you there?
So Deanne Sanchez is saying, great job, guys. Though she may have made that comment before. Debbie says, what a talented kid got paid. William Charles says, sweet zombie Brigham Young. Trevor Larson says they should be paid. So there's one side of that position.
Trying to figure out how I can, let me do this. Drop my call. Let me try to initiate the outbound call again and see if this works.
Initiating outbound call.
Host. All right. You are now. That definitely is working. So we definitely know we're connected.
It's definitely Satan.
Charles, if you could call back, I'm really super sorry. I hope I'm not this person I've hung up on twice. We'll see though. Here's excuse me, Marzipan. Go ahead. Hello? Marzipan?
I'm here. Sorry.
Right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering if you got any Christmas packages, RFM.
Why do you ask?
I was wondering if perhaps you received some marzipan.
No. Should I have?
No.
Did you send me marzipan?
No. I did. It'll get there eventually, probably. I don't know. Your neighbor got it and ate it. I don't know.
Well, I'm so sorry. Believe me, I'm sorry. Because I love marzipan. You sent me marzipan and I didn't get it?
You're not getting a sucker. You're in the tub.
I didn't get any marzipan from anybody.
It's all good. I just loved you telling the story about your mom getting marzipan at Christmas time. So,
well, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to it now. And once it arrives, and I'm going to say when, not if, I'll take a picture of it and put it on Facebook.
But while I'm here, I just can't let this slip by again, guys. I'm not a fan of the LDS Church at all, in general. I'm not a fan of the guidance that they put out on the transgender issue. However, I think they were much more balanced than I expected them to be. And I feel like gender ideology under the radar is creating much more confusion and issues and problems than you realize, particularly because you're both male. And so
that sounds very sexist of you, I must say.
I have friends who are transgender. That's not the issue. But there's no reason that, well, let me back up. The church has to do something because you can't just have unfettered access to the ladies' room for anyone who wants to put on a dress. It's not okay. And that's not about discrimination. That's nothing to do with discrimination. 99% of all sex crimes are committed by men, and women are the vast majority of victims. I'm not saying that transgender people even are, commit sex crimes. They do at the same rate as any other male. But keeping all men out of women's spaces is really important to women's safety, to their well-being, and to how they feel about being out in the world. And that's something that I think gets missed by you guys because you don't have the experience of being a woman in the world.
I don't mean to be rude, Marzipan, but it sounds like we got to give that kid some cereal. There's a kid screaming in the background. So.
Is that your kid?
She's not. It's not. That's my Christmas present.
You got a kid as a Christmas present.
What's Tim Ballard's number, RFM?
I did. He's 4. He's my grandson, and I guess we get to keep him.
Nice.
But anyway, yeah, he's a good kid. He's out of the bath now, whether I wanted him out of the bath or not, and he's about to get ready for bed. But,
all right. Well, hey, Marzipan, I appreciate your sending the marzipan. I appreciate your expressing your opinion. I know that your opinion is one side of this hotly contested issue, and I appreciate your expressing it here.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good
day.
rest of the evening.
Bye-bye.
Happy New Year.
All right. So there were other calls. One person hung up on themselves, and then Charles, I'm really sorry, but in the process of getting my technology to work, that call got dropped. I'd love it if you called back, and sorry if we're hanging up there, but we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, I don't have any other calls in the queue at the moment, but there is Nathan Hinckley down below, so I'm going to bring him on.
Oh, he's going to try and say you guys need to be done within the next 9 minutes because he's got a show he's going to be on that he thinks is more important than ours. Isn't that right, Nathan?
Is that what it is, Nathan?
Hey, what's up, gents? How are you?
Great.
Hi, Nathan. Why are you calling?
Well, I was going to ask, can you tell us a little bit more about the whole Oaks thing where, did you guys get a copyright strike for...
oh my gosh, that's a big news story.
Yeah, I wanted to know, that was my understanding that he called for that. After I watched that show, I actually texted my stake president and I said, hey, so I understand the church is coming after us. Have you received this information? And he said he didn't know anything about it. So I was just curious, do I have that right?
Bill, does he have that right? I was paying attention to live chat again. This is why, okay, live chat. I'm so sorry. I love you dearly, and I'll go over you later. But right now,
that's
you're
okay.
far too tempting.
Nathan, yes. Again, I don't know exactly. Elder Oaks, RFM, you covered this. Elder Oaks.
What he did was he did leadership training. He said, you're not doing enough excommunicating out there. He had a whole slideshow about all the reasons why it was that you need to be excommunicating more people. And then it got leaked to me, and I put it up in an RFM, right? It was an RFM.
It was a Radio Free Mormon YouTube video as well as podcast audio.
Yes.
The YouTube
and it was,
video.
and there was you take it from there because you got a strike.
Yeah, the YouTube video got shut down. We got a copyright strike. And the audio, the audio is still up everywhere because in the audio you don't show the actual images. So
I just read them.
What we concluded, which is pretty easy to conclude, is that the church, by doing so, confirmed that the graphics actually do belong to them. They actually do own the copyright to those. And YouTube,
it's a bad move on their part, I think.
Yeah. So all it does is verify that what you were covering was in fact a true thing that the church had done.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Some people were surprised. They thought maybe it wasn't real because Elder Oaks had a picture of him on every slide. Some, on the other hand, thought that was evidence that he probably did do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I thought that was pretty big news this year, so we'll see if they follow through.
Are you going on a show here shortly, like in 7 minutes?
No, I'm going on a show tomorrow, though, with Cultural Hall.
That's not tonight?
No.
Okay, we can go on for another hour then, Bill.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Nathan.
Thanks for bringing that up because that is an important story, and I forgot.
All right. Appreciate all you guys do.
Take it easy.
You're awesome.
Bye-bye. All right, and then we'll go to our last call for the night. I don't know. What's the name, caller? Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, what's the name?
Oh, I'm Cynthia.
Cynthia, you're the last call of the night for Mormonism Live. What do you think of 2024 year in review?
I think it's awesome. And I just think you do such a service to people that are especially struggling with leaving the church and all the brainwashing that goes on there, and just putting things out there, especially about the narcissism and the, I mean, I don't think that's your focus, but I think the articles and things that you review really accentuate why this is important. I mean, it causes harm to people in their lives. I think it has a propensity to breed killers that think that they're entitled to hurt people and sexually molest people, and all the whole gambit of crimes that happens to people that are victimized by the Mormon Church and its doctrine. So I just think you're awesome. And I know you've helped me a lot in my struggle to, leave the church, and I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. We appreciate you.
Have a great day. Thanks for the call.
You too. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
All right, RFM. So there was 2024 year in review. Anything you want to say before we close out the show?
It's been a blast. 2024 was incredible. A year ago, I never would have envisioned or dreamed of a year like 2024 with all of the things going on. And I expect that 2025 is going to be the same.
It is actually quite impressive to see that much stuff come out of the church in 1 year.
Yes.
And President Nelson, early on in his tenure, said, take your vitamins. Lots of stuff is going to happen. And then he changed the rhetoric to an ongoing restoration. And he said, you haven't seen anything yet. So I think we should expect more stories in 2025. So folks, please continue to tune in. We'll see you Monday for the newscast. We'll see you this Friday, 8 p.m. for Mormonism After Dark.
Yep.
And we'll see you next Wednesday for the next episode of Mormonism Live at 6:20 p.m. Mountain Time. Thank you to everybody who joined in.
Can I just share what the theme is going to be for Mormonism After Dark?
Please.
This is if you want. This is viewer driven, but this is just a theme and an idea, because I'll tell a couple stories. This is about when you're so self-righteous as a Mormon that you're attending theater or you're attending a movie, and there's something that's so unrighteous about what's going on up on the stage or up on the screen that you feel it is your duty, your moral duty, to stand up and walk out. Have you ever done that? I have. Have you ever seen anybody do that? I have. So if you want to think about those and call in with those experiences, and just, remember, take a trip down memory lane about how wonderful it used to be that self-righteous, then join us on Friday. All right. So I'm sorry, Bill, you're trying to close this out, and I keep trying to make it last.
You're all right. Mormonism After Dark this Friday. Share your stories of when you stepped away in order to make a point. This Friday, 8 p.m. I think it's the funnest show that we do, and I'm excited to do it with you. And I'll see you Friday, RFM. I'll see the rest of you Friday. Otherwise, we'll see you guys next week for the next episode of Mormonism Live. And thank you, everybody who supports the show. Thank you for watching. And until then, bye-bye, everybody.
Good night.